The content in this video is based on factual, real-life events and public records. All opinions expressed are for educational and documentary purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised, as some scenes may depict sensitive content. This video is intended for informative purposes and complies with YouTube's guidelines. Under the soft glow of early morning light, the women were already screaming. Not screaming in anger, not screaming in fear. They were screaming names. The sound poured out of the brick buildings and over the high metal fence, cutting through the quiet countryside like a siren that never stopped. From the outside, this place looked calm, almost peaceful. Neat paths, trees lining the walkways, small houses that could have belonged to a quiet English village. But inside those walls, something had arrived. Windows flew open. Women pressed their tattooed arms through the bars, fists shaking, faces twisted with rage. Some cried. Some laughed. Some just stared, silent and shaking, their jaws clenched so tight their teeth hurt. A prison officer moved fast down the path, radio buzzing, eyes scanning every doorway. Another followed close behind, keys clattering like warning bells. They weren't escorting a riot team. They weren't responding to a fire. They were protecting one woman. She walked between them with her head high, dark ink crawling up her neck and disappearing beneath her uniform. Her arms were marked with rough tattoos, words, symbols, scars that told stories no one wanted to hear. She didn't flinch. She didn't look left or right. She smiled. Inside these walls were women who had robbed stores to survive. Women who sold their bodies to feed an addiction. Women who had lost their children to the system and cried themselves to sleep every night because of it. And now they were being forced to share space with someone accused of doing the one thing no one inside could forgive. Killing a child. The officers knew what could happen if she was left alone for even a moment. They had seen boiling water turned into weapons. They had seen women dragged from cells bleeding. They had seen what rage looks like when it has nowhere to go. This prison had a code, and she had broken it before she ever arrived. Behind one door, a woman sat on the floor, knees pulled to her chest, whispering, "Not here. Not here." Behind another, someone slammed the wall again and again until their knuckles split. Down the corridor, an alarm suddenly screamed to life. This was HMP Styal, one of the toughest women's prisons in the world. A place where mothers and child killers sleep a few doors apart. Where addiction spreads faster than disease. Where self-destruction is daily routine. Where survival depends on who you are and what you've done. And as that woman disappeared behind a steel door, the question echoed through the prison. How does a place that looks so quiet hold so much darkness? And more importantly, who survives when the worst women in Britain are locked together? If you enjoy real, gripping prison documentaries and true stories, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with your friends and family. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss more shocking and exclusive content. The first thing most women noticed was the grass. When the prison transport finally slowed and came to a stop, there was a strange stillness. The engine idled. Keys rattled. Then the doors opened, and daylight rushed in. Not the hard, gray concrete light most of them expected, but open sky, trees, a stretch of green lawn that looked almost unreal after hours sealed inside metal. One woman stepped down and froze. Another bent slightly, staring as if she didn't trust her eyes. A third quietly reached down and brushed her fingers across the grass, just to be sure it was real. For a second, it felt like a mistake had been made. Like they had been dropped at the wrong place. This was HMP Styal. From the outside, it didn't look like a prison. There were no towering walls pressing in, no endless blocks stacked on top of each other. Instead, there were low buildings spread wide, brick houses with pitched roofs, narrow paths winding between them, hedges neatly trimmed. It looked like a small village tucked away in the countryside near Manchester. Quiet, almost gentle. That illusion ended the moment the first metal door slammed shut. Inside reception, everything changed. Voices hardened. Instructions came fast and sharp. Names were called. Shoes were taken. Jewelry removed. Pockets emptied. Every woman was searched, scanned, logged. A camera flashed. Heights were measured. Personal details reduced to forms and numbers. The tattoos were noticed immediately. Officers' eyes flicked to inked arms, necks, hands. Black lettering, rough symbols, faces etched into skin. Some tattoos were sloppy and rushed, others carefully done, layered over years. They told stories without words. Who'd been inside before? Who belonged to where? Who carried pain they never spoke about? One woman had dark writing wrapping around her forearm, faded from age and bad decisions. Another had stars crawling up her neck, disappearing into her collar. A third bore a thick black mark across her knuckles, each letter worn smooth from years of clenching fists. No one explained the rules. You learn them by watching, by staying quiet, by understanding that from this moment on, control was gone. When processing ended, the women were handed clothes that smelled faintly of detergent and someone else's life. Leggings that didn't fit quite right. Shirts stretched at the seams. Shoes already broken in. Nothing here belonged to anyone anymore. Then they were walked out into the open space between the houses. The air felt wrong. Too open. Too free for a place built to hold people in. The paths curved gently. Trees cast shadows across the ground. Somewhere nearby, birds were singing like nothing terrible had ever happened here. But the women already inside were watching. Faces appeared at windows. Arms rested on railings. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as new arrivals passed. Every movement was studied. Who looked scared? Who looked angry? Who walked with their head up like they had nothing left to lose? The tattoos were read instantly. Ink was language here. This was how it always started. Each house held around 17 women. Communal living. Shared kitchens. Shared bathrooms. Shared tension that never really left. The doors stayed unlocked during the day, giving the feeling of freedom without any of the safety. There were no private moments. No quiet corners. Everything you did was seen by someone. The first arguments started before dinner. A chair moved. Someone accused someone else of touching their food. A look lasted half a second too long. Voices rose fast, sharp with anger that had nowhere else to go. Someone laughed too loud, trying to show strength. Someone else stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Most of the women here weren't killers. Shoplifting, drug charges, fraud, short sentences that had stretched into years because the cycle never stopped. Many were here because addiction had swallowed everything else. Others because they'd broken laws that felt small until they stacked up too high. But they lived alongside women whose crimes were known far beyond these fences. And everyone knew it. Rumors moved faster than officers. Who had arrived? Who was being kept separate? Who was on protection? Who couldn't be allowed near the rest without risking chaos? Names were whispered, some spoken with disgust, others with anger so deep it felt physical. In this place, killing a child was not just a crime. It was a mark that never faded. That knowledge settled into the walls like damp. By evening, the atmosphere thickened. The village calm disappeared. Conversations dropped to murmurs. Doors were shut harder than necessary. A woman with heavy tattoos across both arms sat alone at a table, staring at nothing, her jaw tight. Another paced back and forth, scratching at old ink as if it itched beneath her skin. When the doors finally locked for the night, the silence felt heavy instead of peaceful. Then the alarm went off. It sliced through the quiet without warning. Loud, urgent, impossible to ignore. Lights flicked on. Boots hit the ground. Radios crackled with voices talking over each other. Officers ran. Inside one house, a woman sat straight up on her bed, heart pounding. Her arms were covered in ink. Names she no longer spoke. Symbols she barely remembered choosing. She pressed her palms into her thighs, breathing hard, listening as footsteps thundered past her door. Someone down the path was crying. Someone else was shouting. The sound echoed between the buildings, bouncing off brick and glass. No one explained what had happened. No one needed to. This was normal here. The alarm stopped as suddenly as it began, leaving behind a silence that felt even heavier than before. Women lay back down, eyes open, minds racing. Some stared at the ceiling. Some whispered prayers they didn't believe in anymore. Some smiled in the dark, already planning. By morning, the new arrivals would understand. Styal wasn't calm. It wasn't kind. It wasn't safe. It was a place where pain collected, where anger simmered, where women with nothing left were forced to live face to face with crimes they could never forgive. And this was only the first night. By the next day, the real test would begin, when names stopped being rumors, when separation failed, and when the village-looking prison showed what it truly was beneath the grass and trees. Something inside Styal was already breaking, and it would not stop quietly. By the second morning, everyone knew the rules. even though no one had explained them. Styal woke early, not to alarms or shouting, but to routine. Doors unlocked. Lights flicked on. The quiet shuffle of slippers on linoleum. Kettles clicked on in shared kitchens as women lined up for weak tea and instant coffee. It looked ordinary, almost domestic. That was the danger, because this was when the prison decided who you were. Breakfast wasn't just a meal. It was an assessment. Who sat alone? Who claimed a chair without asking? Who kept their eyes down? Who scanned the room like they were already calculating threats? Conversations were short and coded. Names weren't asked directly. You learned by listening. Ink spoke louder than words. Tattoos were noticed immediately. Not admired, analyzed. A woman with heavy black writing down her arms didn't get questions. She got space. Another with faint, patchy ink from a teenage mistake was watched more closely. Fresh tattoos meant recent time inside. Old ones meant survival. And then there were the women with marks no one wanted to read too closely. Those women didn't walk freely. They moved with officers nearby. They sat apart. They were escorted in silence. Their presence felt before it was seen. Conversations stopped when they entered a room. Cups paused halfway to mouths. Eyes followed them, sharp and unforgiving. At Styal, crimes had a hierarchy. Stealing from a shop to feed an addiction? Common. Fraud? Plenty of that. Violence against an adult? Uncomfortable, but understood. But harming a child? That placed you outside the prison's fragile social order. By mid-morning, the whispers had settled into certainty. One woman in particular had arrived under protection. Her name passed from mouth to mouth, without ever being spoken to loudly. Some women spat when they heard it. Others laughed in disbelief that she'd been sent here at all. A woman with a tattooed crown across her shoulder leaned against the kitchen counter and shook her head. "They shouldn't put her with us," she muttered. Someone else replied quietly, "They know what they're doing. They always do." Everyone understood what that meant. Styal didn't separate women to keep them safe. It separated them to manage damage. The officers knew the tension was rising. You could see it in the way they stood, hands closer to radios, eyes constantly scanning rooms. Movement was watched carefully. Too many women gathering in one place raised immediate suspicion. Still, the prison tried to run as normal. Work details were assigned. Cleaning, kitchens, laundry. Education classes were announced, though half the women wouldn't attend. Movement between buildings increased, and with it, opportunity. That was when the look started. A woman passed another in the hallway and held eye contact just a second too long. Someone laughed behind her hand. Someone else muttered an insult under their breath, quiet enough that staff couldn't challenge it. No one made the first move. Not yet. Because in women's prisons, violence rarely explodes. It builds. It builds through silence. Through waiting. Through watching. By afternoon, the atmosphere felt heavier than it had the night before. The grass still shone green. The birds still sang. But no one noticed anymore. The illusion had worn thin. Inside one house, a woman sat at the table rubbing her wrists where old tattoos wrapped around bone. She had 2 children on the outside. Photos tucked carefully into a folded letter beneath her mattress. She hadn't slept well. The rumors had kept her awake. Across from her sat another woman, younger, restless, with fresh ink creeping up her neck. She kept tapping her fingers against her mug, eyes darting toward the door every time footsteps passed. "You hear it's true?" she asked quietly. The older woman didn't answer right away. Then she nodded once. The younger one scoffed. "They're mad, bringing her here. They always bring them here," the older woman said. "They just don't stay comfortable." That afternoon, an officer intercepted a group before they could even reach the path. Calm voice. Firm tone. "Move along. Nothing to see here." The women dispersed slowly, smiling like it was all harmless. It wasn't. By evening, the prison was coiled tight. Dinner passed with minimal talking. Chairs scraped loudly against the floor. Someone deliberately sat where they shouldn't have. Another woman stood up too fast, knocking her tray slightly. The clatter echoed through the room like a warning shot. An officer stepped in immediately. "Enough," she said. "Sit down." They did. For now. After lock-in, the real conversations began. Doors closed. But voices traveled easily through walls that were never meant to hold secrets. Women spoke in low tones, laying out what they'd heard. Who was where? Who was being watched? Who wasn't allowed out alone? Some women wanted action. Others wanted distance. A few wanted nothing to do with it at all. But no one was neutral. In one room, A woman stared at the ceiling, fingers tracing the outline of a tattoo on her forearm, her daughter's name. She clenched her jaw, anger pulsing beneath her skin. In another, someone sat on the edge of her bed, rocking slightly, whispering to herself that she just needed to get through the sentence. Don't get involved. Don't look. Don't speak. The officers did another round that night. Extra checks. Extra patrols. Radios crackled softly in the dark. They knew. They had seen this pattern before. A calm exterior. Rising tension. Then a moment, brief, sudden, where control slipped. The alarm didn't go off that night. That was worse. Because silence meant everyone was waiting. Waiting for a mistake. Waiting for a door to be left unlocked too long. Waiting for an escort to be delayed. Waiting for the prison's unspoken rules to enforce themselves. Styal didn't need riots to remind women where they were. It only needed proximity. By the end of the second day, the message was clear. This place was not divided by walls or fences. It was divided by judgment. And no amount of grass, trees, or village paths could soften what happened when those judgments collided. Tomorrow, patience would thin even further, and someone, officer or inmate, would have to decide how much risk was too much. Because at Styal, violence didn't announce itself loudly. It arrived quietly. And once it did, there was no pretending anymore. By the third day, Styal stopped pretending. The routines were still there, doors unlocking, head counts, work call-outs. But something underneath had shifted. The tension that had quietly built over the last 48 hours was no longer subtle. It sat openly in the rooms, in the corridors, in the way women moved past one another without speaking. This was the day people chose sides. Not officially, not out loud, but through small decisions that mattered more than they seemed. Where you sat, who you spoke to, who you avoided, whether you looked away or stared back. The prison's invisible lines were being drawn. Morning association began as usual. Women drifted into common areas, mugs in hand, pretending this was just another day. But the air felt thick. Conversations stalled whenever certain doors opened. Chairs were claimed quickly, almost territorially. One woman entered the kitchen with an officer close behind her. No one said her name. They didn't need to. The room went quiet in a way that couldn't be mistaken for coincidence. A spoon paused mid-stir. Someone stood up and left without explanation. Another woman muttered something under her breath and tightened her grip on her mug. The escorted woman kept her eyes forward. She had been instructed not to respond, not to react, not to look vulnerable or defiant. She followed the rules carefully. That didn't matter. At Styal, protection didn't mean acceptance. It meant delay. By mid-morning, officers were breaking up clusters before they formed. Movement was restricted without explanation. A cleaning detail was canceled. Education was postponed. Officially, it was due to staffing. Unofficially, it was because too many women were watching each other too closely. The prison was holding its breath. In one house, a woman with heavy ink down both arms paced the length of the corridor, then stopped suddenly. She leaned against the wall, jaw clenched, knuckles white. Another woman watched her from the doorway, saying nothing. "You all right?" she finally asked. The tattooed woman laughed once, sharp, humorless. "Does it look like it?" No one pushed further, because everyone understood the feeling. By lunchtime, the first incident happened. It wasn't dramatic. No alarms. No sirens. Just a tray knocked from someone's hands. Plastic clattered against the floor. Food spilled. A voice snapped back instantly, loud, angry, unchecked. Chairs scraped. Bodies shifted closer. An officer stepped in fast, calm but firm. Names were called. Women were separated. One was escorted out, still shouting, still shaking with rage. The rest sat back down like nothing had happened. But the message was clear. Control was slipping. That afternoon, the prison split into two emotional camps. Those who were angry, furious that certain women were allowed inside these walls at all. Women who felt the system had betrayed them by forcing proximity to crimes they could never forgive. And those who were afraid. Afraid of being caught in the middle. Afraid of guilt by association. Afraid that one wrong look could make them a target. Neutrality was disappearing. In the corridors, eyes followed officers constantly. Who was being escorted? Who wasn't? How many staff were assigned to one woman versus another? These details mattered. They told the real story. Protection meant the prison expected trouble. In the late afternoon, the escorted woman was moved again. Different path. Different timing. Same silence. As she passed a window, someone inside slammed it shut. Another woman laughed, not because it was funny, but because anger had nowhere else to go. An officer's radio crackled sharply. Her hand went to it instinctively. They kept walking. Back in one of the houses, a woman sat on her bed staring at a photograph she'd folded and unfolded so many times the edges were soft. Her child's face smiled up at her, untouched by the chaos inside these walls. She closed her eyes. "This place messes with your head," she whispered to no one. And it did, because Styal forced people to sit with things they had buried. Guilt, rage, loss, judgment. You couldn't escape it here. You carried it from room to room. As evening approached, officers increased patrols. Extra staff appeared, standing at corners, watching silently. The village illusion was gone now. No one noticed the grass anymore. No one cared how calm it looked from the outside. Dinner passed in near silence. Then came lock-in. Doors closed. Keys turned. The prison exhaled, but only slightly. Voices traveled easily through the walls. Some women talked quietly, replaying the day. Others stayed silent, staring into the dark. A few laughed softly, adrenaline still humming under their skin. In one room, a woman lay awake, listening to footsteps pass her door again and again. She traced the outline of a tattoo on her arm, a name, worn thin with time. Her chest tightened. Tomorrow felt dangerous. Not because something had happened, but because something hadn't. This was the most unstable moment, when anger hadn't found release yet. When everyone was waiting for someone else to cross the line first. The officers knew it too. That night, they did extra checks. Shone torches through observation panels. Listened at doors longer than usual. Their radios murmured constantly, low and controlled. They were trying to hold back something they'd seen before. Because in prisons like Styal, violence doesn't always come from chaos. Sometimes it comes from restraint breaking, from days of swallowed rage, from enforced proximity, from silence stretched too thin. As midnight passed, the prison remained quiet. Too quiet. Somewhere, a woman sat awake, jaw clenched, replaying every rumor she'd heard. Somewhere else, another stared at the ceiling, heart racing, knowing she couldn't leave this place even if she wanted to. And somewhere behind a locked door, the woman everyone was watching lay still, listening to the building breathe around her. By the third day, Styal had shown its true shape. Not explosive, not wild, controlled, pressurized, waiting. And when pressure builds long enough, it doesn't need much to release. Tomorrow wouldn't need a spark, just one mistake. And the prison knew it. By the fourth day, patience was gone. Not exploded, not shattered, just worn thin enough that everyone could feel it. Styal moved slower that morning, like a body waking up sore after a long night. Doors unlocked, but no one rushed out. Women lingered in doorways, listening before stepping into shared spaces. The energy was cautious now, controlled, but brittle. This was the day instinct took over. Breakfast passed with barely a word spoken. Cutlery scraped softly against plastic trays. Eyes stayed low, but awareness was high. Everyone noticed where officers stood, how many were present, who they were watching, and who they weren't. The escorted woman hadn't appeared yet. That absence was louder than her presence. By mid-morning, the prison adjusted its rhythm without explanation. Movement times were staggered. Certain paths were closed off. A work detail was quietly canceled and replaced with cell-based activity. Officially, it was routine. Unofficially, it was containment. The officers weren't reacting anymore. They were anticipating. In one house, a woman with dark ink wrapping around her wrists sat at the kitchen table, jaw tight, hands folded together like she was holding herself in place. Across from her, another woman leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "You feel that?" the second woman asked quietly. The first nodded once. "Yeah." Neither explained. They didn't need to. The tension had shifted from anger to decision. Not everyone wanted trouble, but enough people were tired of swallowing it. Late morning, the escorted woman appeared again. Different route, different time, same silent gravity. Two officers walked with her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched hers. Their posture was alert, their eyes constantly moving. As she passed between buildings, a voice called out. Not loud, not shouting, just enough to be heard. Everything stopped. The officers reacted instantly, tightening formation, moving her forward faster. The voice didn't continue. It didn't need to. The message had landed. Inside the houses, reactions rippled quietly. Some women smiled. Others stiffened. A few shook their heads, already predicting what came next. Because lines had now been crossed. That afternoon, tempers flared over something small. They always did. A phone slot. A missed turn. A perceived slight. Two women argued near the laundry room. Voices sharp. Insults edged with personal detail. A third stepped closer, not to help, but to watch. Another laughed. An officer arrived before it could escalate, separating them, issuing warnings that carried more weight than the words themselves. But the anger didn't leave. It spread. By late afternoon, the prison felt compressed, like the air had been sucked out and replaced with something heavier. Women moved in clusters now, not for safety, for solidarity. The unspoken alliances of prison life were forming fast. You stood with who you understood, or who understood you. Inside one room, a woman sat on her bed staring at the wall. Her tattoos, once bold, now felt like scars she couldn't escape. She hadn't slept well since arriving. The whispers, the looks, the constant awareness that one wrong association could mark her. "I just want to do my time," she murmured. But Styal didn't let anyone do time quietly. It demanded participation, whether you wanted it or not. As evening approached, officers increased presence again. Extra staff lined the paths. Radios stayed active. The prison looked calm, but everyone inside knew it was artificial. Dinner was tense. A chair scraped too loudly. Someone laughed at the wrong moment. A woman stood up suddenly, tray abandoned, eyes blazing. An officer intercepted her mid-step, voice low, authoritative. "Not tonight," she said. The woman hesitated, just for a second, then sat back down. Not defeated. Postponed. Lock-in came early. Doors shut. Keys turned. The sound echoed longer than usual, like the prison itself was listening. Inside the houses, women settled onto beds, but sleep didn't come easily. This was the night conversations changed. Less rumor. More resolve. Behind closed doors, voices whispered plans. Not always violent. Not always specific, but purposeful. Some women talked about avoiding certain areas. Others talked about making a point. A few talked about nothing at all, staring into the dark, anger burning silently behind their eyes. In one house, a woman pressed her forehead against the cold window, staring out at the quiet path below. The grass glowed faintly under security lights. It still looked peaceful. She almost laughed. That illusion had fooled her once. It wouldn't again. Down another corridor, an officer paused longer than necessary outside a door, listening. Inside, the voices dropped instantly. The officer moved on, expression unreadable. They knew they couldn't stop everything. They could only delay it. Midnight passed without incident. That was unsettling, because by now, everyone expected something. The quiet felt intentional, like the calm before something finally snapped. Somewhere, a woman clenched her fists beneath her blanket, jaw locked tight. Somewhere else, another stared at the ceiling, replaying every look she'd exchanged that day, wondering which one might come back to haunt her. And somewhere else, the woman at the center of it all lay still, escorted even in her thoughts, aware that protection only worked when officers were present, and officers weren't everywhere. By the fourth day, Styal had reached its most dangerous phase. Not chaos. Not violence. Expectation. The prison wasn't asking if something would happen anymore. Only when. And when pressure reaches that point, it doesn't need a crowd. It only needs one moment. One hallway. One delay. One decision made too quickly. Tomorrow, the balance would finally tip, and Styal would stop holding its breath. By the fifth day, Styal made its decision. Not in an announcement. Not with sirens. Not with shouting. It happened in a moment so small it almost went unnoticed. The morning began like the others, quiet, deliberate, controlled. Doors unlocked. Head count cleared. Women moved carefully now, fully aware that the smallest mistake could ripple outward. Everyone felt it. The pressure that had been building all week hadn't disappeared overnight. It had hardened. This was no longer tension. It was resolve. The escorted woman didn't come out at her usual time. Her movement had been delayed, intentionally. Officers stood longer at intersections, speaking quietly into radios. Routes were changed again. Schedules adjusted on the fly. Containment had replaced routine. But containment has limits. Late morning, in a narrow corridor between two houses, timing failed. An officer was pulled away for less than a minute. Another was delayed by a call elsewhere. Doors opened and closed as women moved between activities, each step calculated, each glance loaded with meaning. Then it happened. Not an explosion, not chaos, a confrontation. Voices rose, sharp, angry, unmistakable. Women stopped moving. Doors creaked open. Footsteps rushed toward the sound. Officers responded instantly. Radios crackled. Commands cut through the air. Bodies were separated. Someone was escorted away, shouting, shaking with fury that had been bottled for days. The entire incident lasted less than 2 minutes. But it changed everything. Because the prison had crossed the line it had been dancing around all week. No one pretended after that. The rest of the day moved under lockdown conditions. Restricted movement. Doors kept closed longer. Staff presence doubled in key areas. The village illusion vanished completely. This was now a prison managing fallout. Inside the houses, the mood shifted again, from anticipation to aftermath. Women replayed the incident in whispers. Who said what? Who stepped forward? Who didn't? Who was moved? Who would be next? Some felt relief. Others felt disappointment. But everyone felt the weight lift, just slightly. Because the waiting was over. In one room, a woman sat on her bed, shoulders slumped, exhaustion finally catching up to her. Her tattoos felt heavier than ever, reminders of the life that had brought her here and the rules she now lived under. It was always going to happen, she murmured. Across the prison, officers completed reports with practiced efficiency. They didn't look surprised. They never were. This was the pattern they knew too well. Pressure, delay, release. The escorted woman was moved again that afternoon. This time, it was permanent. A different unit, a different routine, more distance, more protection, less exposure. The prison had decided the risk was no longer manageable. It had waited as long as it could. By evening, Styal felt quieter, not calmer, but settled. The kind of quiet that comes after something has finally given way. Women moved more freely now. The unspoken tension replaced by something familiar. Resignation. Dinner passed without incident. Conversations returned in low tones. Someone laughed, softly, genuinely. Another woman played music quietly in her room. Life inside the prison resumed its strange version of normal. But no one forgot what the week had shown them. That beneath the trees and tidy paths, Styal was still built on pressure. Still ruled by judgment. Still shaped by crimes that never truly stayed in the past. As lock-in approached, doors closed one by one. The sound echoed down the corridors, no longer ominous, just expected. Inside her room, a woman lay back on her bed and stared at the ceiling. She thought about how close everything had come, how quickly it could happen again. She thought about survival, not strength, not power, just survival, because that was the real sentence here. Not the years, not the walls, but the constant negotiation between who you were, what you'd done, and what the people around you could forgive. The officers did their final rounds quietly. Radios low, footsteps measured. The prison breathed again, slow and controlled. Styal had passed through its most dangerous moment. For now, OUTRO. From the outside, HMP Styal still looks peaceful. A quiet cluster of buildings surrounded by grass and trees. A place that could be mistaken for a village if you didn't know better. But inside those walls, calm is never permanent. Because prisons aren't defined by architecture. They're defined by people. Women carrying addiction. Women carrying loss. Women carrying crimes the world refuses to forget. Forced together. Watched constantly. Judged endlessly. At Styal, survival isn't about strength alone. It's about timing. Awareness. Knowing when to speak and when to disappear into the background. This week showed what happens when pressure builds too long. When protection meets resentment. When silence becomes louder than violence. And it won't be the last time. Because as long as prisons exist like this, clean on the outside, volatile within, the cycle will continue. Tension will rise. Lines will be drawn. And the balance will always sit one mistake away from collapse. This wasn't a riot. It wasn't a headline. It was something more honest. A glimpse into how fragile order really is, and how quickly a place that looks calm can reveal its darkness. If you want more real stories from inside the world's most misunderstood institutions, stay with us. Because behind every locked door, there's a story waiting. And some of them don't stay quiet for long. If you enjoy real, gripping prison documentaries and true stories, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with your friends and family. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss more shocking and exclusive content.